Imagine having the literal blueprints to dismantle a corrupt system just sitting right on your desk.
Right, like right in front of you.
Exactly. You have the exact schematics of how the power structure operates, where the money flows and where all the structural weaknesses are.
You have all the
But
answers.
instead of reading them, you spend all day standing in the street, shouting up at a brick wall with a megaphone, just hoping the building will, I don't know, decide to collapse on its own.
Yeah, which it won't. It's the illusion of action versus the mechanics of actual change.
Which is the exact trap today's source material is trying to save you from.
Because we are so conditioned to believe that whoever is making the most noise is wielding the most power.
We really are. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a truly fascinating astrological forecast today, along with an accompanying narrative designed specifically for tomorrow, March 28th, 2026.
Right, and this comes to us from Tarot by Hasey.
Yes, which you can find at tarot.hic.net. Okay, let's unpack this, because what we are looking at is not your standard daily horoscope.
No, not at all.
It doesn't just tell you the vague vibe of your Tuesday. It is it's a strategic blueprint.
It's incredibly specific.
It takes specific astrological transit data and pairs it with this fictional original story. They call it a StoryScope.
I love that term.
Right. And it uses that to illustrate exactly how to navigate drastic real-world upheaval.
And our mission for you today, as the listener, is to internalize the critical difference between what this text calls loud power and effective power.
Which are two very different things.
Very different. We are going to look at the psychological draw of the spectacle, why it ultimately fails, and how you can actually begin to dismantle and rebuild the systems that operate quietly in the background of your own life.
And to understand how to do that, we kind of have to look at the general architecture the source lays out for March 28th. It breaks the day down chronologically.
Right, into morning and afternoon.
Yeah. The morning is flagged as a time for clarifying priorities and setting firm boundaries, just getting your internal house in order.
Which you're going to need.
Definitely. Because the afternoon is when the atmosphere really shifts.
Right.
That is when steady momentum is supposed to build, support gathers, and the timing finally clicks into place.
And that afternoon momentum isn't random. The text explicitly links the shift to a massive celestial mechanic operating in the background.
Right.
It points directly to a major astrological transit, Saturn sextile Pluto.
Let's translate that, because Saturn sextile Pluto sounds like a sci-fi novel.
It really does.
What is actually happening there mechanically, for using my analogy, loud power is like someone shouting in a crowded room, but effective power is being the person who quietly holds the keys to the building.
That's a great way to put it. And what's fascinating here is how the geometry of the transit supports that exact idea.
Okay, how so?
Well, geometrically speaking, a sextile in astrology occurs when two planets are exactly 60 degrees apart in the sky. It is considered a harmonic angle, an angle of opportunity. It means cooperation. So rather than these two massive planetary energies crashing into each other and causing chaos, they are functioning like perfectly meshed gears.
So they're working together.
Exactly. They are collaborating.
Okay, so they're cooperating. But what are the actual forces at play? Because the source describes this energy as a demand to merge discipline with depth.
Let's break down the two gears. So Saturn represents structure, discipline, boundaries, and, time. It is the architect.
Your rulemaker.
Yes. Pluto, on the other hand, is the planet of evolution, deep transformation, and crucially, the uncovering of hidden rot.
Ooh, hidden rot.
Yeah, it's the demolition crew that finds the structural flaw. So when you put them in a sextile, a cooperative angle, Pluto exposes the rot in the foundation, and Saturn provides the disciplined scaffolding needed to safely rebuild it.
Wow. And the source notes a really specific historical context for this, too. It says Saturn and Pluto are connecting harmoniously for the first time since 2020.
Right. And just think about the weight of that. What happened in 2020?
Oh, man.
Everything. Massive global structural shifts. Entire systems of living and working were just torn down.
Completely upended.
Now, 6 years later, these same two planets are connecting again, demanding an audit of what we have built since then. The text says this transit forces us to face a very hard truth.
Which is?
We aren't as far along as we thought we were.
Man, we aren't as far along as we thought we were. That stinks.
It's a reality check.
It really is.
Yeah.
It implies we've been busy, sure, but maybe not actually productive?
Because true transformation requires an unflinching assessment of your baseline.
You have to know where you're starting from.
Exactly. The source is adamant that this energy is not about making a dramatic, sweeping gesture to try and catch up.
No quick fixes.
Right. It's about merging that Pluto depth with that Saturn discipline. It is asking you to do the patient, honestly unglamorous work required to achieve a goal that actually aligns with your personal mission statement.
Rather than just reacting to whatever the crisis of the day is.
Precisely.
The text even says this shift won't necessarily be felt as a single day's event, but more as background architecture.
A structural shift.
But, I mean, if we were talking about uncovering rot and rebuilding foundations, that implies resistance. And the forecast does not pull its punches here.
It really doesn't.
If the afternoon brings momentum, we have to ask what exactly you're pushing against.
Because momentum requires friction. It doesn't happen in a vacuum.
And the friction described here is intense. The text issues some very dark warnings for tomorrow.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, it mentions that people might feel inspired to actively fight for a cause, which, sounds positive. But it immediately warns that deep fears may surface regarding our basic needs.
Right.
It explicitly calls out potential environmental upheaval or disruptions in the supply of resources we commonly rely on.
It is a stark reminder that structural change rarely happens without material consequence.
But I have to push back on the philosophy here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
The source advises us to maintain calm, disciplined, effective power, and to act on compassion and intuition during these disruptions.
Yes, that's the goal.
Let's look at the reality of that, though.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How do you maintain effective power when the supply chain breaks down?
It's hard.
If the grocery shelves are empty tomorrow or the power grid fails, human intuition usually says panic. Human intuition says hoard.
Absolutely.
How does the listener actually maintain effective power when the literal systems keeping them alive start to glitch?
Well, that is the core challenge of the Pluto influence. Pluto brings the chaos and the primal fear.
The panic.
Yes. But remember the other half of the transit, Saturn. Saturn is the grounding wire here.
Okay.
The psychological mechanism of Saturn is to force cold, objective logic into a highly emotional space.
So it counters the panic.
Exactly. So when the supply chain breaks, a Pluto response is to panic because the illusion of safety is gone. A Saturn response is to look at the empty shelf and realize, okay, this specific distribution model has a single point of failure. It is fundamentally broken.
Oh, I see. So it's not about finding a magical way to fix the broken system in that panicked moment.
Not at all. The source specifically says we face these dark truths not to wallow in them, but to acknowledge what actually needs to change. You don't try to frantically patch a failing system.
You don't put a Band-Aid on it.
Right. You map its failure points. Think about it. If your company's complex budgeting software crashes and deletes a month of work, you don't spend 3 days crying and trying to salvage the corrupted code.
You pull out a blank spreadsheet.
Exactly. You pull out a blank manual spreadsheet and start over. You pivot resources. You honor what must end.
Honor what must end. Wow. That takes a massive amount of cognitive discipline.
It really does.
Because it is so easy to cling to a broken system, like a broken app, a toxic job, a dysfunctional relationship, just because the routine of it is familiar.
Familiarity feels like safety, even when it's actively harming you.
Yeah, even when it's toxic.
That is why the astrology demands this specific blend of strategic influence. You have to accept that the old way of doing things has expired.
It's over.
Only then can you carefully choose where to apply your energy to build something that will actually endure the next stress test.
Okay, so if the astrology is demanding that we find this hidden rod and quietly rebuild our systems, the obvious question is, how?
Where do you start?
Yeah. Where do you even begin looking for the failure points in your own life? And the source actually answers this, not with a bulleted to-do list, but with a blueprint disguised as fiction.
The StoryScope. It is such a brilliant pivot in the text.
It's amazing.
It takes these vast, abstract planetary mechanics and translates them into a very grounded, gritty, human scenario.
And the text ties this story to another transit. Venus conjunct Chiron. What does that mean, mechanically?
So conjunct basically means two celestial bodies are occupying the exact same degree in the sky from our perspective.
Okay.
Their energies are entirely fused together.
Fused. Got it.
Now, Venus governs what we value, our resources, our connections. Chiron is an asteroid known as the wounded healer.
The wounded healer.
Yeah, it represents our deepest systemic vulnerabilities, but also our profound capacity to mend them. So when Venus and Chiron fuse, the astrology is signaling that your true value right now doesn't come from your successes, but from your willingness to finally address and heal your structural wounds.
And that brings us perfectly to the protagonist of the story, Elena.
Yes, Selena.
She is a strategist working late in a city that the text describes as restless, loud with arguments that went nowhere. Outside her window, there are protests, speeches, endless declarations.
Lots of noise.
But Elena has realized that all that is just noise. The text calls it the spectacle.
And the spectacle is intoxicating. It releases dopamine.
Oh, for sure.
Standing in a crowd and yelling at a building makes you feel powerful because you are taking physical action.
You feel like you're doing something.
But Elena recognizes the trap. The spectacle doesn't require you to actually understand where the power in that building lives.
Exactly. And instead of joining the protests, what is Elena doing? She is in her office studying the most mind-numbingly boring documents imaginable.
Just deep in the paperwork.
She's poring over maps of the city's municipal infrastructure, procurement logs, records of quiet decisions made in back rooms.
Because a procurement log tells you the objective truth.
The money trail.
Yes. It tells you exactly where the money flows, which reveals what the system actually prioritizes, regardless of what the politicians are out there yelling about on television.
Wait, hold on. I'm just putting this together as we talk through it.
What is it?
In the story, Elena discovers missing reports and quiet, unlogged alterations to public records. And she notes that these anomalies have been happening since 2020.
Right.
She realizes that two massive hidden bureaucratic systems have begun intersecting again after years apart. The story is literally mirroring the math.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a phenomenal detail. The two hidden systems intersecting in the narrative are the fictional embodiment of Saturn and Pluto connecting for the first time since 2020.
And is so wild.
The author has embedded the celestial mechanics directly into the plot.
That is so clever. And it sets up this incredible tension between Elena and her associate, Marcus.
Marcus is great.
Marcus walks into the office, sees her staring at old logs, and is completely baffled. He is the voice of the spectacle.
He wants action.
Right. When Elena shows him her master plan to dismantle the corrupt city leadership, which is literally just a single line written on a scrap of paper that says, "Begin with the archive," Marcus is entirely unimpressed.
He looks at it and literally says, "That's paperwork."
Yes. He looks at her plan to change the world and dismisses it because it isn't dramatic enough for people. He wants a revolution that looks good on camera.
He wants a movie moment.
Exactly. And Elena's rebuttal cuts right to the bone. She tells him, "Dramatic change rarely lasts. I'm not interested in theater."
I'm not interested in theater. I'm interested in systems.
That's a good line.
It is. And if we apply that to the listener, how often do we get caught up in the theater of our own lives?
Oh, all the time.
When we are unhappy, we crave the grand confrontation. We want to dramatically quit the job by flipping a desk or have that explosive screaming argument that finally fixes the relationship.
Because it feels good in the moment.
We want the cinematic moment because the spectacle feels like a resolution.
But the spectacle doesn't change the underlying mechanics. Flipping a desk doesn't fix your career trajectory.
No, it just makes you unemployed and angry.
Right. Elena realizes that true power doesn't live in the megaphone. It lives in processes, in signatures on obscure forms,
You're boring stuff.
in the unnoticed connections between departments that haven't been audited in years. It lives in the quiet places.
And that is the absolute core of the actionable advice for March 28th. The source is demonstrating that success does not come from dominating the room or winning the shouting match. It comes from observing how the machinery operates.
Finding the weak spot.
Exactly. Locating the exact point where a tiny amount of leverage can create a massive shift. Elena is thinking like a structural engineer.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What's fascinating about the execution of her plan is that Elena doesn't have some explosive weapon to take down this corrupt bureaucracy.
No bombs.
Her entire strategy relies on a single, thin key card to access a forgotten government basement. Her plan isn't a bomb, It's a virus in the code.
Or, like removing a single vital linchpin from a massive engine.
Yeah.
You don't need to smash the engine to pieces with a sledgehammer. You just slide out one pin.
Can't wait.
The engine might keep running for a while, but eventually the internal friction tears it apart from the inside.
And she knows exactly which pin to pull because she spent months doing the unglamorous, patient work of studying the blueprints.
Paperwork.
Right. But Marcus pushes her on this. He asks her what happens when the plan goes wrong. And Elena's response is chillingly calm. She doesn't offer false hope. She just says, it will go wrong, several times.
Notice how that completely subverts the usual hero narrative.
It really does.
Marcus asks if that inevitable failure bothers her.
Right, and she admits that it used to. Back when she was younger, when she was loud and certain and convinced she was further along than she truly was.
Sound familiar?
Right back to the astrology. But not anymore. She tells him that real change should take years.
That acceptance of delay, the willingness to endure failure without abandoning the mission, that is the ultimate expression of Saturn's discipline.
The long game.
If we anchor Elena's mindset back to your daily forecast, this is the patient work the astrology demands. The corrupt system in the story thrived because it assumed no one would ever want to do the boring work of looking in the archive.
They relied on complacency.
Elena leverages their own laziness against them.
Why? It really makes you wonder where the blind spots are in our own routines. Like Marcus even points out that the people who built this corrupt system will eventually notice she's in the archive.
Of course they will.
And Elena just says, they will.
Yeah.
But her strategy is that by the time they notice the missing linchpin, she will have changed the underlying code so slowly and so fundamentally that the system will collapse before they can stop it.
She's already won.
She tells Marcus that tomorrow night, she takes the first real step. Not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely.
It is a masterclass in the restraint required for true empowerment.
It really is.
As the source points out, loud power attracts attention before it has leverage. It tips its hand. The person with the megaphone warns the building that they are angry.
Giving them time to prepare.
Right. Effective power waits. It gathers its leverage in the quiet, unglamorous spaces, and it only moves when it controls the locks on the doors.
Framing a daily astrological reading as a geopolitical thriller is such a brilliant way to communicate these concepts.
It's so engaging.
It takes the listener out of the passive mindset of, what is the universe going to do to me today? And puts them entirely in the driver's seat.
What broken system in my life am I going to quietly begin dismantling today?
Exactly. It demands agency. You are no longer a victim of environmental upheaval or supply chain friction.
No.
You are the strategist mapping the failure points so you can build something better.
Absolutely.
So let's synthesize this down into a practical toolkit for you for tomorrow, March 28th. According to the architecture provided by Tarot, by High C, use your morning to get your house in order.
Clarify your priorities.
Set your boundaries. Then, when the afternoon rolls around, momentum will build, but that momentum will likely crash into some friction.
Expect it.
You might face disruptions in your environment, your resources, or your daily routines. When that glitch happens, resist the primal urge to panic or make a loud, dramatic gesture.
Do not fall for the theater of the moment.
Instead, observe the failure point. Honor what is clearly not working anymore, and start looking for the quiet lever you can pull to change the structure.
And keep the source's wisdom in mind here. The right thing is rarely the easy thing.
Never is.
The work of auditing your life is tedious, but by drawing on inner strengths and a discipline you perhaps didn't even know you possessed, you can reclaim your inner authority.
You have the power.
You absolutely have the ability to move meaningful, long-term projects forward, provided you commit to the patient, sustainable work required to see them through.
It is entirely about building endurance, playing the long game, and proving to yourself that you are far more capable than you ever gave yourself credit for.
Well said.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this incredibly layered forecast. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final thought.
A little something to chew on.
Exactly. We spent this time talking about Elena pulling the quiet lever, dismantling the corrupt system from the inside out, while everyone else was distracted by the protests outside.
The spectacle.
Right. But consider the consequence of that success. If you actually manage to quietly fix the broken system in your own life, well, what happens to all the people who built their entire identities around the spectacle of complaining about it?
Ooh, they lose their enemy.
If you take away the chaos they rely on, they lose their enemy. So as you head into your day tomorrow, ask yourself, if true power lives in the quiet, unnoticed routines and systems, What is the archive in your own life that you haven't audited in years?
And are you prepared for what happens when you open it?
Exactly. And what might begin to shift if you finally requested access to it tomorrow?